welcome back. I'm going to read the rest of chapter 2. I just read I had two videos that broke up chapter 2 into a first part and a second part. The second part I had to make put on the private side because my connections class helped me out, and I don't want to put their faces out there and stuff. But anyway, the first part you can access. Then there's a couple pages that I read in between that you can get the link to. And then here is the rest of chapter 2 after Pierre went to the trading post and somebody looked at him and said, "Nah, I'm not gonna, you're too young." And then another person who used to work with Pierre's dad vouched for him and said, "Hey, any person who's related to old man, can't remember their last name anyway, he's good enough for me." So Pierre's dad had somebody who knew him that this person vouched for Pierre, so Pierre could join the Voyageur group and make some money for his family. McKay then handed the pen to Pierre. When Pierre signed his name to the contract, and he didn't make an X like most of the men, McKay said, "Well, what do you think of that? Charbonneau, what do you think of that, Charbonneau? Any lad who writes with such a strong hand, well, he's going to be a fine paddler." Charbonneau made no comment. He frowned at Pierre's signature on the contract. So he frowned. I wonder why he frowned. Most men signed with an X, but Pierre signed his name, and Charbonneau frowned. Next, while McKay checked off each item on the list, Charbonneau issued Pierre the standard Northwest Company supplies. He got a blanket, a shirt, a pair of trousers, pants, 2 handkerchiefs, and a 2-pound twist of carrot tobacco. Carrot tobacco. Ugh, sounds kind of gross. When Charbonneau counted out the 1/3 advance on his yearly salary, Pierre felt proud knowing that he had done the right thing to help his family. And it's a 1-year salary, by the way. McKay then concluded Pierre's engagement by shaking his hand and saying, "Just make you stay clear of those Hudson Bay rascals." I wonder what that means. Knowing how much the Northwest men hated their arch rival, the Hudson Bay Company, Pierre quickly said, "I will, sir." And McKay turned to Charbonneau and have him work with Le Petit today. That should keep him busy. Charbonneau nodded with a wry smile and marched around the table and headed towards the door. Charbonneau was long-legged and lean compared to the other voyageurs. His quick movement reminded Pierre of Monsieur Moreau, a man who owned a combined livery stable and funeral parlor in Lachine. A livery stable and a funeral parlor. Interesting. I'll have to look those up. I know what a funeral parlor is. Charbonneau had the same sort of thin face, with points and angles. Before Charbonneau stepped outside, McKay called, "Hey, make sure Le Petit has secured that last Montreal canoe." Charbonneau turned and acknowledged McKay's command. "Aye, aye, sir. And tell him to make sure that it's all watertight. The last we hired from that scoundrel Langlois leaked like a rotten thatch job." So you don't want to get a canoe that leaks, because if the canoe leaks, bad things happen. Pierre had to walk fast to keep up with Charbonneau. Charbonneau's on a mission. And as they approached the low log storehouse, Pierre wondered what sort of fellow this little La Petite might be. Charbonneau led Pierre into the storeroom. The only light inside was cast by an oil lamp. No electricity. It hadn't even been invented yet. Pierre had never seen such a vast pile of goods. Bolts of calico cloth and ribbon, and crates crammed with bells and colored beads and mirrors, sewing material. All that stuff was piled up on shelves that lined either wall. And stacked around the room were boxes that held spears, ice chisels, gaff hooks, and for trapping beaver during the winter. There were kegs and nested copper kettles that were stacked near the entry. They thought of hauling all these trade goods the length of the Great Lakes suddenly made Pierre uneasy and a little nervous. Anyone can sign his name and pocket salary, he thought. But what about actually doing the work and portaging cooking pots and musket balls in 35-foot lake canoes? Le Petit, Charbonneau called, squinting into the half dark. Where's that fellow gone now? He mumbled. Le Petit! Charbonneau tried again, stepping forward and calling twice as loudly. Out of the corner of his eye, Pierre thought he saw a dim shadow, but before he could turn, two hands seized his ankles from behind and suddenly jerked his feet out from under him. Hey! Pierre threw out his hands to keep his face from smashing onto the dirt floor. An instant later, he was swinging upside down, staring at a large pair of moccasins. Largest pair of moccasins he had ever seen. Let me go! Pierre yelled. Let me go! Someone was laughing uproariously. So what have you brought me, Charbonneau? Something to put on the shelf? Or shove into one of those little barrels? Charbonneau laughed as Le Petit swung Pierre up towards the rafters, and then he let go of his ankles. Pierre squealed again, thinking for a moment that this giant intended to kill him, but Le Petit caught the boy by the armpit just as he began to fall, and then he set him back down. That's a good one, Le Petit, Charbonneau chortled. Hiding in the dark, you know how to spook a fellow. Meet your helper for the day. This is Pierre Lepage. The fellow they call Le Petit was... There goes my light again. The fellow they call Le Petit was the biggest and the scariest Frenchman Pierre had ever seen. His frizzy black bear hair brushed the log tie beams, mixed in with the log tie beams overhead. His pants and shirt were deerskin, and they smelled as if they'd been tanned with pig brains and smoke. Yum. When La Petite reached out his hand, Pierre took a step back, and he trampled Charbonneau's foot. Stand still, boy, Charbonneau ordered. Pushing him forward again, Pierre braced himself. Afraid to imagine what this giant's going to do to him next. Please pardon my behavior, monsieur, Le Petit said, bowing at the waist and pretending to remove a cap from his bare head. Had I known you were my assistant, I wouldn't have treated you so rudely. Then he let out a deep chuckle and tousled Pierre's hair. To work now, he added, and he started to the rear of the building, expecting Pierre to follow. And Pierre did follow, all morning, all afternoon, and there was no stopping. Accustomed to the quiet order of school, Pierre was amazed at the frantic pace Le Petit maintained. They sorted trade goods, they hauled supplies, they went to another warehouse on a big flatbed wagon, they inspected the new Montreal canoe at the boatworks. Pierre learned a lot about the fur trade merchandise, and he was glad to discover that the giant Le Petit was a gentle and fair fellow. Le Petit explained each job to Pierre and was patient with Pierre's questions. Unlike the intense Charbonneau, Petit walked with a relaxed stride. He would whistle or hum a song as he worked. The big man even took Pierre's side late that afternoon when an evil-looking character confronted Pierre just after they returned from the boatworks. Who's your little friend, Le Petit? The man said, sneering at Pierre with the black, unblinking eyes of a snake. Leave Grandpa alone, Beloit, Le Petit said, wagging a finger in his face. He's a good worker. Leave the young guy alone. Unafraid of Le Petit's warning, Beloit spat in the dust at Pierre's feet. Send him to a dressmaker. Pierre couldn't help but stare at Beloit. He had a soiled shirt, open at the neck. His chest was covered with black matted hair. His ragged beard, stooped shoulders made him look more like a bear than a man. But the thing that startled Pierre was his nose. The left half had been ripped off. Beloit scowled one last time and walked away, grumbling to himself. As soon as he was out of earshot, Pierre asked Le Petit, what happened to that guy? That's quite a nose, ain't it? Why, he's a fighter, Grandpa. He just loves to scrap. One day, an ornery fellow with very big teeth bit the side of his nose clean off. You know, they do have food. You don't have to eat people's noses. Le Petit grinned at the shock on Pierre's face. I'm meeting all the pretty ones today, aren't I? Pierre said. That you are, Le Petit clapped on the back of his on his back and turned towards the wagon. So now Pierre had a nickname. These voyageurs sure loved to call the tallest man in their brigade the tallest man in their brigade by the French word for shorty. So the tallest man they called Le Petit. And they would soon call the smooth-faced boy Grandpa. Pierre had a nickname, Grandpa. Interesting. So Pierre is now working for the Northwest Trading Company. On to Chapter 3.